There's something about Frankfurt that feels deliberate, not cold exactly, just precise, like every part of the city was placed there for a reason. And maybe it was. I've spent time in financial centers that run on energy, on instinct, on the confidence of individuals making fast decisions. Frankfurt doesn't feel like that. It feels like a place where decisions are made slowly, carefully, according to rules that existed before anyone currently working there was born. That's not a criticism. It's an observation. And the more time I spend here, the more I think that precision is exactly the point. Frankfurt built its financial system on regulation, not as an afterthought, not as a response to crisis, though crisis certainly shaped it, but as a foundation, the idea that rules come first. That structure matters more than speed, that the system should work the same way regardless of who's running it. That's a different philosophy than what you find in New York or London. Those places celebrate the individual, the brilliant trader, the visionary banker, the person who sees what others miss and acts before anyone else can. Frankfurt doesn't celebrate individuals the same way. It celebrates the system, the rules that everyone follows, the procedures that don't change based on personality or mood. That might sound boring. And honestly, sometimes it is. But boring has value, especially in finance, especially when you've seen what happens when excitement takes over. To understand why Germany built its financial system this way, you have to understand what came before. The 20th century was not kind to this country. Two world wars, economic collapse, hyperinflation that destroyed savings overnight, a currency that became worthless, people who had worked their entire lives watching everything disappear. That kind of trauma doesn't fade quickly. It shapes how institutions think, how they plan, what they fear. Germany learned, through painful experience, that instability destroys everything, that chaos is the enemy, that the only way to prevent disaster is to build systems strong enough to contain it. That's where the emphasis on regulation comes from, not from a love of rules for their own sake, but from the memory of what happens when rules break down, when inflation runs wild, when institutions fail, when trust in the system collapses. Germany decided, after all of that, to never let it happen again. And Frankfurt became the center of that decision, the place where the rules are made, where the regulations are written, where the systems are designed to prevent the kind of collapse that still lives in institutional memory. The European Central Bank sits in Frankfurt. That's not an accident. When Europe needed a place to anchor its monetary system, it chose here. Because Germany had built something that other countries trusted, not because it was exciting, because it was stable, because the rules were clear, because the institutions worked the way they said they would work. That trust was earned over decades, through consistency, through doing the same things the same way, year after year, regardless of political pressure or market excitement. That's what regulation really means in this context. Not bureaucracy for its own sake, but predictability, the confidence that tomorrow will work like today, that the rules won't change suddenly, that you can make plans based on how the system operates. I think about how different this feels from other financial centers. In New York, speed is everything. The first one to act wins. Hesitation is weakness. You move fast, you take risks, you accept that sometimes you'll lose. In Frankfurt, speed is almost suspicious. If you're moving too fast, you probably haven't followed the proper procedures. You probably haven't considered all the implications. You probably haven't checked with everyone who needs to be checked with. That slows things down, obviously. Decisions that might take hours in New York take days here. Sometimes weeks. The approvals, the reviews, the documentation, the careful consideration of every possible consequence. Some people find that maddening. They see it as inefficiency, as bureaucracy getting in the way of business, and sometimes they're right. Sometimes the rules do slow things down more than necessary. But there's another way to see it, as protection, as a system designed to prevent the kind of reckless decisions that create crises. When you have to document everything, when you have to get approvals, when you have to follow procedures, you can't act on impulse. You can't make bets that might destroy the institution if they go wrong. You're forced to think, to consider, to slow down, And in finance, slowing down often prevents disaster. Not always, but often enough that it matters. Let me talk about how regulation functions here, because it's not just about following rules, it's about how the rules shape behavior. When you work in a highly regulated environment, you start to think differently. You anticipate what the regulators will ask. You build compliance into your processes from the beginning. You don't try to find loopholes. You try to understand what the rules are actually trying to achieve. That mindset becomes cultural. It spreads beyond the specific requirements of the law. It becomes how people approach their work, carefully, methodically, with attention to procedure. I notice it in meetings here, the way people prepare, the documentation they bring, the precision with which they describe what they've done and why. Nothing is casual. Nothing is improvised. Everything follows a process. That can feel stiff to outsiders, overly formal, but it also creates clarity. Everyone knows what's expected. Everyone knows what the standards are. There's less ambiguity, less room for misunderstanding, less room for the kind of confusion that leads to problems. There's a relationship between regulation and trust that I think about a lot. In some financial systems, trust is personal. You trust the individual, the banker you've worked with for years, the advisor who knows your situation. If that person leaves, the trust goes with them. In Frankfurt, trust is institutional. You trust the system, the rules, the procedures, the fact that whoever is handling your business is following the same standards as everyone else. That's a different kind of trust. Less warm, maybe, less personal, but also more durable because it doesn't depend on any individual. It depends on the structure, on the regulations that define how things work, on the oversight that ensures those regulations are followed. That kind of trust can survive personnel changes, leadership transitions, market volatility. It's built into the institution itself, not into the people who happen to work there at any given moment. I think about what happens during crises, because that's when you really see what a system is made of. When markets panic, when fear takes over, when everyone is making emotional decisions, Frankfurt tends to respond differently. Not with panic, not with dramatic action, but with procedure. The rules still apply. The processes still work. The institutions continue to function the way they were designed to function. That might seem inadequate in a crisis, too slow, too bureaucratic, but there's value in that steadiness. When everyone else is losing their heads, a system that keeps working according to plan provides an anchor, a reference point, a place where the rules still mean something. During the 2008 crisis, during the European debt crisis, during the pandemic, Frankfurt didn't reinvent itself. It applied its existing frameworks. It followed its procedures. It made decisions according to its established processes. Sometimes those decisions were criticized as too slow, too cautious, too bound by rules when flexibility was needed, and some of those criticisms had merit. But the institutions didn't collapse. The system didn't break. The framework held, and in a crisis, holding is often what matters most. Let me step back and think about this more broadly. Every financial system makes choices about what to prioritize, about what risks to accept, about how to balance speed against safety, growth against stability, innovation against predictability. Frankfurt chose regulation. It chose rules over instinct, procedure over personality, slow and steady over fast and risky. That's not the right choice for every situation. There are things that Frankfurt doesn't do well. Innovation tends to happen elsewhere. The exciting new developments in finance, the disruption, the experimentation, that usually comes from places with less regulation, places where you can try things without getting approval from 17 different agencies. Frankfurt accepts that trade-off. It's not trying to be the most innovative financial center in the world. It's trying to be the most stable, the most reliable, the most predictable. And for certain purposes, that's exactly what you want. If you're a large institution looking to operate in Europe, you want to know the rules. You want consistency. You want to be confident that the regulatory environment won't change suddenly based on political whims. Frankfurt offers that. It's been offering that for decades. And that consistency is itself a competitive advantage. not the only kind of competitive advantage, but a real one. I notice how regulation shapes everyday life here, not just in the financial institutions. In the city itself, there's an order to Frankfurt that extends beyond the banks. The transportation runs on schedule. The systems work. The rules are followed. You see it in small things. The way pedestrians wait at crosswalks. The way businesses operate during their stated hours. The way appointments begin precisely when they're supposed to begin. That's not fear of punishment. It's cultural expectation. The belief that following rules is simply what you do. That order benefits everyone. That predictability is a form of respect. Some people find that constraining. They want more spontaneity, more flexibility, more space to do things differently. And there are places that offer that. Frankfurt isn't really one of them. It's a city that values knowing what to expect, that values systems working as designed, that values the quiet efficiency of things happening according to plan. I keep coming back to this idea of regulation as infrastructure because I think that's the right way to understand it. We don't usually think about infrastructure, roads, power grids, water systems. They work in the background. We notice them only when they fail. Regulation in Frankfurt works the same way. It's the invisible structure that everything else depends on. When it's working, you don't see it. You just see a financial system that operates smoothly, that processes transactions, that manages risk, that continues to function through changing circumstances. The regulation isn't separate from that. It's what makes it possible. The framework that holds everything together, the rules that everyone follows so the system can work. Is this the future of finance? I don't know. There's constant tension between regulation and innovation, between stability and growth, between the kind of careful, methodical approach that Frankfurt represents and the faster, riskier approaches of other centers. Different places will make different choices. Different institutions will choose different environments based on what they need. But I think there will always be demand for what Frankfurt offers, for predictability, for stability, for a system where the rules are clear and consistently enforced. Not everyone wants that, but enough do. Enough value the security that comes from knowing how things work. From trusting that the system will function the same way tomorrow as it did today. That's what Frankfurt built. That's what it continues to maintain. Through changing markets and evolving technologies and all the pressures that push financial systems toward speed and risk, Frankfurt keeps choosing regulation, keeps choosing rules, keeps choosing the slow, steady, predictable approach that has defined it for decades. It's evening now. The towers are lit, the European Central Bank visible in the skyline. A reminder of what this city represents, not just to Germany, to the entire continent. The idea that stability can be designed, that chaos can be contained, that if you build the right rules and enforce them consistently and resist the pressure to cut corners or move faster than wisdom allows, you can create something durable, something that outlasts individuals, something that keeps working through crises, something that people can trust. That's what I see when I look at Frankfurt. Not excitement, not the adrenaline of markets moving fast and fortunes being made. Something quieter, more structural, a system that was designed to last. And so far, it has. Whether it will continue to, no one can say. The world changes. Pressures build. New challenges emerge that old rules weren't designed to address. Frankfurt will have to adapt. But if history is any guide, it will adapt carefully, methodically, according to procedure, changing the rules when necessary, but slowly, deliberately, making sure the foundation remains solid. That's the Frankfurt approach. That's what regulation means here. Not rigidity, not inability to change, but change that happens thoughtfully, carefully, with attention to consequence, with respect for what has been built. I watch the city settle into night, quiet, ordered, everything in its place. Tomorrow, the systems will start again. The procedures will continue. The rules will be followed. And somehow, in a world that seems increasingly chaotic, that's reassuring. Knowing that somewhere, there's a place where order matters, where structure holds, where the rules still apply.